Okay, so finally GoPro has announced its GP3 cameras for 2026. We now have the details of what they are and the form factor that they'll take. I was right about some stuff, wrong about other stuff, but let's get into the details of what these cameras bring to the table. Now, I was briefed by GoPro before the announcement, and it does appear that this is the end of the line for the Hero series. I don't think we're going to be seeing a Hero 14. The company seems quite adamant that this is a new direction that it's taking. Obviously, increased competition from the likes of DJI and Insta360 in the out-and-out action camera market has put pressure on GoPro quite considerably. Now, these new cameras represent a changing direction to more premium orientated cameras where the focus is on overall image quality, but also general filming, not just out and out action. It's very clear from how they're positioning this camera that although they can be used for action camera purposes, they're very much focused on general photography and image capture. In other words, instead of going head to head with Insta360 and DJI, they're taking a bit of a different course. Now, the new line is built up of 3 different cameras that will be staggered in release across 2026. The very first camera to be released will be the Mission 1 Pro, and then that will be followed later on in 2026 by the Mission 1 and the Mission 1 ILS. So what are the main features of these cameras and how do they differ? In effect, it looks as though, on paper at least, GoPro has produced the camera or cameras that people have been asking them for quite a few years now. We've got the 1-inch sensor, something I never thought GoPro would ever do, and I've outlined the reasons for that many times before, but one of those includes the hyperfocal distance, i.e. the minimum focus distance off to infinity. Action cameras generally need a close focus, but because these cameras are not being directed directly at action sports and adventure in the same way that the Hero series was, you know, perhaps that isn't so much of a problem. The only question I have with the 1-inch sensor choice is how this affects things like vlogging, because vlogging is very much one of those areas that GoPro now wants to focus on, and in a sign of how much it wants to align its cameras with that sort of use, it's also producing its own wireless microphone system with 32-bit float recording as well. So the 1-inch sensor was a surprise. It's also a surprise that all 3 cameras share the basic body design and the sensor, and obviously the GP3 processor. All 3 cameras are variations on the same camera effectively. So with the Mission Pro, we do have a much more action camera style of device. It has a fixed lens, and it also has a removable or changeable lens cover as well, so you can put ND filters on it in a similar way to the way you would with the Hero series. Now, because it has a 1-inch sensor, it has to be a bit bigger because the lens needs to be bigger, so it will be larger and heavier than the Hero series. But along with the other 2 cameras in the range, it does share the multiple mount system that was seen on the Hero series with the fold-out fingers, the magnetic clip ability, and the 1/4-inch screw mount as well. The Mission 1 ILS, which we'll see later on the year, is an interchangeable lens mount camera. So it's effectively the Mission 1 Pro, but with a changeable lens system, and it uses the Micro Four Thirds lens mount, which opens it up to a lot of different lenses on the market. It's still the same rugged construction as the Mission 1 Pro, but obviously you won't be able to take it underwater without a housing of some sort. Now, the 1-inch sensor does mean also that the lenses will have a crop factor of around 2.7, which is quite significant. So if you want an ultra-wide lens, then you'll be looking at the Mission 1 Pro. It could be done on the Mission 1 ILS, but you're looking at something like a 4mm fisheye lens from a company like Laowa, for example. Now, all the cameras feature GP Log 2 2, which is obviously an evolution of the original GP log. Now I expect that with the larger sensor and the new GP3 processor, we're going to see quite a wide dynamic range. In fact, in GoPro's recent promotional footage, we've seen that the dynamic range looks very natural and quite cinematic in look. Now the 8K sensor that the new cameras uses can record 8K at up to 60 frames per second. It can record 4K at 240 frames per second, and there's also a burst mode which records 1080p at 960 frames per second. So we're looking at quite a capable slow motion camera, and I suspect with the Mission 1 ILS camera, there's going to be some really creative shots coming out of it using these modes. One of the big questions I know people are going to be asking is about thermal performance and battery life. Now, GoPro claims that in 1080p, the new Mission 1 cameras will be capable of recording 5 hours of runtime. You know, that is significantly higher than anything else on the market right now. I don't know what Insta360's specs are for its new cameras, but 5 hours is impressive no matter which way you look at it. 4K, obviously you're going to get less, and 8K, you'll obviously get less again. The interesting thing is that most of the modes, not all of them, but most of the modes on the camera will record continuously without airflow, with no thermal shutdown. That's what GoPro is claiming anyway. It remains to be seen when I test the camera later on. But for now, it looks like GoPro has thoroughly addressed the thermal performance issues and the battery runtime issues. These are impressive specifications, but like I say, we need to see how it performs in the real world to get a handle on, you know, what the real situation is. Now, I know that the interface on the cameras has been completely redesigned from the Hero series. It looks nothing like it. GoPro has apparently been working very hard on making an even easier to use, much more responsive interface for the cameras. So again, going to be interesting to see how that works. We can adjust all the parameters of the image to sharpness and noise levels, but you'll also be glad to know that these cameras will also be able to use Labs firmware as well. So if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of the camera setup, then the Labs firmware will be available, and that's unique to GoPro cameras. It's a very powerful option, and I think on these cameras, because of the kind of markets that they're aimed at, Labs may well have a larger take-up than it did on the Hero cameras. In terms of bitrate, the high bitrate option on the cameras comes in at 240 megabits per second. That's double that of the camera's competitors. You can up that to 300 megabits per second if you use a Labs firmware as well. So again, this is something that points to GoPro's focus on image quality. And I think looking at how the Mission 1 ILS is set up with the interchangeable lenses, this is a camera that might come in very useful for filmmakers who want to use it as a stunt camera. They want an ultra high image quality in the kind of situation where you don't want to risk much more expensive cameras. You know, I am talking about Netflix production and feature film production here rather than your average sort of low budget filmmaker. But for those sorts of productions, this camera will be pocket change. So it makes a potentially great option for stunt camera use. The Mission 1 Pro apparently is capable of going down to 20 meters depth in water. I've been told that it can actually survive deeper than that. The only reason why it isn't recommended to take it down lower than 20 meters though is because the water pressure then starts to depress the buttons, so you might lose control of it. It will start recording itself and stopping recording itself due to the water pressure. So again, it looks like a significant effort has been put into making these cameras as strong and as durable as they possibly can. Now, thankfully, fast charging is now a thing on these new GoPro cameras. The one thing I think will be a sticking point for people will be with the Mission 1 ILS and the fact that it doesn't have an autofocus capability. This will be a big deal for some people. For me, it's not so much, because if I'm doing cinematography style shooting, then I always manually focus my cameras anyway. The other big question there is how easy is it to focus and how good are the focus assist options on the camera. But I do know that there will be complaints from some quarters that there's no autofocus capability on it. The development of these cameras has quite clearly been a long and hard one for the company. GoPro is not a large company. I think the addition of trying to develop an autofocus for this release may well have been way too much. I suspect we'll probably see something in the future on, say, the Mission 2 cameras, but for now, the Mission 1 ILS with the interchangeable lenses is manual focus only. As I mentioned at the head of this video, this is potentially a make or break moment for GoPro. And as we know, the economy around the world is in a very difficult situation. It's in a very precarious situation. So it remains to be seen whether cameras like this can command the market. You know, do people have the money for them, for one thing? And does a camera like the Mission 1 ILS offer anything over and above any potential competitors, such as some of the smaller mirrorless cameras, for one example, or even the Pocket 3 or the Pocket 4. And it's also clear that a lot of vloggers have moved to an action camera style device because it can withstand the elements in a way that DJI's Pocket series can't. So I can see the Mission 1 Pro certainly gaining more market than the Mission 1 ILS. I think a lot of people have been crying out for a vlogging focused camera like this with the 1-inch sensor, better low light performance, much better low light performance from what I'm seeing, and much higher image quality, but in a package where the DJI Pocket 3 and Pocket 4 would be quite vulnerable with their gimbals and the weather conditions that might present themselves. So people who have moved over to the Osmo Action 6 and the Action 5 for vlogging purposes may well be taking a serious look at GoPro's Mission 1 Pro. Obviously, we need to see how reliable it is. It's a brand new product with an unproven processor in it, with first generation software on it effectively because it is a new camera. So we need to go through the reliability of it and make sure that it stands up to par. But if it does, I think this could be one of the best options out there for vlogging and even action camera use, because even though it is heavier and larger than some of the other cameras, it isn't as big as a 360 camera and it's not as heavy as a 360 camera. So using it on a helmet for POV seems perfectly legitimate to me. But again, we'll see when I get my hands on the camera for testing. As I say, this is going to be make or break time for GoPro. The company has had to instigate another round of layoffs this year. So hopefully these cameras will offer a turnaround of fortune for it. I know a lot of people who watch my channel, you know, I've said this before in other videos, it seems like a fashionable thing to be bashing GoPro. I really like the company. I really like the products that it makes. And I think the image quality from it and the color science on their cameras are some of the best around, particularly when you're shooting a good light. And if these new cameras offer that color science or even improve on that color science in an even more capable camera, particularly with the slow motion capabilities that they have, then I think that is an amazing thing. And I really do hope that this does offer a glimpse of some sort of turnaround for GoPro's fortunes. But I will let you all know what I think of the camera when I've tested it. I will be getting hold of one to look at. And yeah, we'll see how that pans out. But anyway, this was a quick video to cover the announcement. And again, check out my other videos if you want. And please do subscribe to the channel and like this video if you do like my content. And I'll see you all in the next video.